There's so many types of venues out there. You're wondering, do I want a hotel? Do I want a warehouse space? Do I need an outdoor ceremony? Like, what do I really want? So this video is really going to focus on the types of venues that are available so you can kind of narrow down what you really want as you begin your search. Welcome back to my channel. My name is Jane Yu. I am a wedding and event planner based in Los Angeles, the co-founder of UNS Events, and I'm here to just provide you with some valuable information as you get started on your wedding planning journey. If you've watched some of my past videos on getting the wedding planning journey started, you have your mind right, you've talked to your partner and your families about what's coming up and how you're going to plan the wedding. You have an idea of what date, which location, which kind of style you want to go for. And now I'm going to dive into the types of venues there are just to help you kind of narrow down what you should be looking for. Now, of course, budget is a big factor, but I'm not going to get into budgeting just yet because I think it's helpful to give you some context about venues first before we even talk about pricing. So the thing about venues is not all venues are created equal, as you might know. Just because one venue is $10,000 for the space fee and another is $5,000, that doesn't mean the $5,000 one is going to be cheaper for your budget overall. So having said that, pricing is definitely not created equal. Not all venues offer the same amenities. So for instance, some might come with furniture, others might not, etc. So you really have to take that into consideration when you're doing your outreach. There might be additional fees. For instance, some venues charge extra for security or cleaning, require you to use a service like valet, for instance, but it's not included in the price they originally quote you. So you definitely want to make sure you have an understanding of what additional fees there might be. So I'm going to just give you a general overview of the buckets of venues that exist. Now, again, there's such a wide range of venues, so I don't want you to think just because I said something about hotels, like this is the only type of information there is out there. This is just to give you a sense from my experience what I know, so you can be a little bit more informed as you're getting quotes and proposals back from venues. So the first one that I want to dive into is hotels. Hotels are great because they're kind of a turnkey venue. I put this in quotes because nothing is ever that turnkey, but hotels do come with a lot of amenities, right? They have food and beverage in-house, they have furniture available, they can provide linens for the tables and also napkins. They don't charge you extra for plates and silverware and things like that. So it's a great option, and they always have plenty of staff to assist you on your day. That's something that I really, really love about hotels. Things you should consider about hotels: you don't always have the most control over the design and decor. You're sort of at the mercy of what the hotel looks like. Hotels usually have carpet, which sometimes doesn't look great. Although when you dim the lighting and everything and there's all the tables and chairs and the dance floor in place, it may not make as much of a difference. But if design and decor is really important to you, you might want to find a very specific type of hotel. For instance, the Santa Monica Proper Hotel. Beautiful space. Kelly Wearstler designed it, so everything is beautiful. So that might be one that you might want to consider. Most hotels, in terms of the venue space options, a lot of times you can have a ceremony outside, but usually for the reception, you will have to be in a ballroom, which isn't always my favorite just because it feels a little bit stuffy depending on how it's laid out. They're usually windowless, which is fine, but I prefer a little bit more airy spaces, but that's usually what's available at hotels. Another thing is that you typically can't go past 10 or so with the music, just because obviously there's hotel guests and they need to turn off the music before or after 10 so that they don't disturb their hotel guests. Sometimes, depending on the property and like where the event space is located, you may also have to lower the volume even during the actual reception. So these are some things that you just want to ask when you're reaching out to hotels. The last thing is food is, a hit or miss depending on what property you go with. Sometimes they're known for their food, sometimes they're not. You may want to do a tasting if food is really important to you before you even go forward with a hotel. Some LA hotels that I would love to do a wedding at. The Santa Monica proper, I've worked on conferences there, but I've never done a wedding there, and I would love to do one there. The staff is great, the guest rooms are great, it's very close to the beach, and so if you need guest accommodations, it's a great location, especially if people are traveling in. As I mentioned, it's a beautifully designed space. The food is actually very excellent, and I can say that from experience. The Moxy Hotel downtown is a really fun, cool vibe. I would say more than a standard traditional wedding, you may want to explore something like their rooftop. It's really great for a buyout. The last time I checked, the buyout fee was actually pretty reasonable in my opinion. It has an amazing view of the city. For people who want a more non-traditional approach, I think that would be a great space to check out. Or even if you wanted to do welcome drinks or maybe the farewell brunch, just reserve a section of it for your guests. That might be a good space for you to consider. In New York City, I really like the Public Hotel. It's a hotel that was designed by Ian Schrager, another amazing designer. You may know him by way of the Edition hotels, which are also beautiful. But the Public has a bunch of different spaces, and I feel like it's probably changed since the last time I've been there. That's another hotel that I would love to plan something at. The One Hotel in Brooklyn Bridge is also beautiful. I love their organic wood green touches. They have a few different event spaces. The hotel is a bit pricey, but I would love to do an event there. Now, one thing about the pricing at hotels, they normally quote you a food and beverage minimum that you have to meet for X amount of guests. So let's say you have 100 guests, they tell you that it's going to be a $15,000 minimum. That does not mean that it's going to be $150 per guest. That is the minimum that you have to guarantee. So you always want to ask for their menus, because sometimes their wedding menus might be $200 a person, meaning you will be spending $20,000 for 100 people. The other thing about hotels is that they always have a service charge and taxes applicable to that minimum or whatever you're spending. So you want to make sure you factor that in. It's usually another 30 to 35%, sometimes more depending, on top of the base food and beverage costs. A lot of times they'll charge you a space fee as well. So that would include setup of the room, staff for it, etc. I would say you want to try and negotiate that space rental as much as possible, just so that if you exceed your minimum, then you don't have to worry about that additional space fee on top of the food and beverage. You always want to have all your ducks in a row and make sure you understand the food and beverage costs before you sign any hotel contract, because once you lock that in, you're bound to that, and they really usually do not budge. The second type of venue that exists are restaurants. Restaurants are great because usually if you're going to a restaurant, the food is going to be really good. They always come with furniture, obviously, because they already have it in their restaurant. A lot of times the design is not bad because restaurants are all about design as well. So you'll have tables and chairs, and then you obviously have all of the glassware and tabletop things that you'll need. Things to consider about restaurants is it can get very pricey because you generally, if you're going to have more than 50, 60 people, you will have to buy out the restaurant. And it can get pretty expensive. You have to replace their weekend evening business, right? So if you're trying to buy out a restaurant for a Saturday evening when that's one of their busiest nights, then it's going to cost a lot of money. On the flip side, there are some restaurants that exist that are not open for lunch. So sometimes you'll get a decent price for a lunch wedding if that's something you're open to. But a lot of times, couples don't really want to have a lunch wedding. But if that's something you're open to, I just wanted to let you know that that's an option. A lot of restaurants also have private dining spaces. So if you're having a more intimate wedding, this is a great option. The only thing about that is, let's say the restaurant is still operating during your wedding time. So when your guests arrive and are just in the restaurant, it might not feel as exclusive, just depending how the restaurant is laid out. But if that's not so much concern to you, then a private dining space could be a great option. Similar to hotels, you may have some noise control issues or volume issues for your music, especially if you're at a restaurant and your group is there with their regular guests and they don't want to disturb their other guests. They sometimes make you turn the volume down. So that might be something for you to consider. A couple of restaurants that I really like Redbird. John and I first went there to just have dinner and just see all the spaces, and the food is amazing. They have a ton of space there, so there's a lot of different options for where you could do your wedding. And even though there are restaurant guests there, it still feels pretty exclusive, especially when you're in the garden, because it's a different pathway to get out there. The only thing about it is in the garden, which is usually where the ceremony takes place, and if you want, you can do all the way up to your reception there. The sound isn't the best. You have to use your in-house sound, and it's not the best sounding system. But on top of that, if you were to do your dancing out there, it's really not that robust of volume because they really don't want to bother their restaurant guests. When John and I did a wedding there, we actually took the dancing part after dinner up to another space, and that worked out really well because we were able to go till midnight, whereas if you're in the garden, you have to be done at 10. So if you're in one of their indoor spaces, you can go later for sure. And even though you do have to control volume, we were able to crank it up pretty high, and everyone really had a great time. One restaurant that I would love to do a wedding at is Hinoki and the Bird. It's located in Century City. It's a beautiful space. You don't have to add too much decor to it because it's already so beautiful. The restaurant provides candles, and they have some little succulents on the tables and things like that. John DJ'd a wedding there, and I would love to plan a wedding there because the food is really, really good. It was probably one of the best vendor meals I've ever had. You can do everything in the same place. I think the guest count isn't too high. There's a cap maybe at like 120 up to maybe 140 or 150. I have to check. The staff was really great. The drinks are really good. It's definitely a place that I would love to plan a wedding at. The last type of venue space that I saved for last is a raw blank event space. It's not a ballroom, it's not a restaurant, it's a place that you can come in and customize the layout and the design. And of course, there's a lot of different types of these types of spaces. There's ones that are complete white box, so you can add really anything to it to make it pop. There's ones that come with some decor, so you can kind of take your pick, and in LA there's so many different ones. The great thing about these spaces is that a lot of them were created with the intention of doing weddings. Of course, they can do corporate events and things like that as well, but a lot of them were created with the intention of doing weddings, so the layout is really great for flow from ceremony to cocktail hour to reception. And if you go to some of the more popular venues, they really have a great way of doing their weddings. I think it's a great option if you want a little bit more of a modern, a little bit more custom approach to planning your wedding. Some things to consider about blank event space is a lot of them do actually now come with tables and chairs, but sometimes they don't come with linens, or sometimes they don't come with enough. So you always want to ask and see what they have available, or maybe it's not your style. You always want to ask what they have available. Sometimes they don't have a kitchen, so you may have to add on kitchen rentals for your caterer, or they have a really small kitchen, so they may have to be outside. So there's just things that hotels and restaurants normally have to deal with when it comes to catering that you will have to tackle for raw event spaces. You have to bring all your vendors in. I feel like the rentals for blank event spaces are definitely at a higher cost, but sometimes the rental fee is lower and you have a little bit more flexibility with catering. The food and beverage might not be as high, or probably won't be as high as hotels and restaurants, so it may even out at the end of the day. Some spaces in LA that we really like, we love all of the Marvin Moan Productions venues. This includes Millwick, Valentine, Grassroom, the Smock Shop, which is their oldest venue in Culver City. We actually got married at Millwick ourselves. I've done a couple of events there. We're actually on their preferred vendors list, so we do a decent amount of weddings there, and we love working with their team. Their staff is great. Every one of their venues has a different type of character, so if one doesn't work for you, then you might find another one that does. And it comes with tables and chairs. It takes care of like that amenities cost. The venue comes with speakers. It can lower the cost of your DJ, for instance. When John DJs there, he charges a lower fee because he doesn't have to haul all of his equipment. So there's certain things that are built in that do kind of help offset what seems like a little bit of an expensive rental fee. I also really like Playa Studios in Culver City. It's a very modern, a little bit moody, but very modern and sleek venue. They have plenty of space for I think up to 200 people or maybe even a bit more. They come with great long farm tables with silver cafe chairs, which I've never really seen at venues. If that's your style, then I think it's great. It has a little bit more of like that industrial vibe with super high ceilings, so it feels really grand. And I think there's a lot you can do with the space. And I believe they also come with some speakers as well, so that would help offset some of your costs too. I also really like the Reverie in Chinatown. It's across the street from one of my favorite restaurants, Major Domo. It's AAPI owned, which is why I always love supporting it. I actually haven't done a wedding or event there, but I am actually going to coordinate a wedding there in November, so I'm really, really excited to see how the space comes to life. It's a complete white box, so you can really customize it however you want, and it's a big space as well, so you have options with the layout. So some tips from me while you're shopping for venues. In my opinion, shopping for the venue and for your attire, especially for dresses, is probably the top two sort of time consuming and most difficult things to tackle. But once you nail down these two things, you'll feel so much better. So when you're venue shopping, you want to take the time to definitely shop around and find the one that you want, because once you lock in the venue, everything else sort of falls into place. When you start doing the research, you'll slowly kind of figure out what you don't like, what you do like, and then you can finally narrow it down to maybe your top 10 choices. Then you can do outreach to see what their pricing is like. And I will go into this a little bit more in terms of budgeting and how to sort of do your budget to fit the venue that you're looking for. But at the end of the day, you probably want to narrow it down to 3, maybe up to 5 that you want to see in person. I feel like if you see any more than 5, you just start to get really overwhelmed and it's going to be hard to make a decision. So I would try to narrow it down to 3 to 5 from the information that you do have, and then set up appointments to see those spaces in person. Don't be afraid to ask venues questions via email. You want to make sure you have the information, because once you sign that contract, you're bound to it. You put down a non-refundable deposit and it's a lot of money, so you don't want to make a hasty decision. Some questions that you might want to ask: what's included in the pricing? How many hours? Does it include setup and breakdown? Do you need to do a final walkthrough? Does that include a security deposit? Do I have to pay extra for cleaning, etc.? You want to know what's included in that. Now, related to that, you want to ask, are there any additional fees that I should be aware of? For instance, if I go over the 12 hours that are included, what am I going to be charged? Some venues lay this out pretty clearly, some don't. So you want to make sure that you ask these questions, because you should never assume something if the information is not in writing. You also want to ask, are there vendors that I'm required to use? So for instance, as I mentioned before, the Marvin Mon venues actually require you to use their valet company. Just because of where their venues are located, they require you to do valet to create a seamless experience for your guests. And that obviously adds to the cost, and that's not included in their fee. Other spaces might require to use their bar services, for instance, and that's going to be a little more expensive than you providing your own liquor and hiring a bartender just to do the service. So you want to ask, are there any required vendors that I need to use, so that you can price those out as well, so you can get a holistic view of what your budget is going to entail. What's the backup plan for inclement weather? If it rains, is there an indoor option? One thing about hotels is, let's say your wedding is supposed to be completely outside. They have so many different spaces that you could use. And usually hotels will include a backup space for rain. In LA, I feel like it's not as big of a deal as opposed to like New York or the Midwest or anywhere else that has more temperamental weather, but it can rain in LA too, or get really hot. So you might just want to know what your options are, because tenting a space is pretty expensive. But if it's a space that you love, I feel like you should know like what the plan is if you just can't do it outside. I touched upon this a little bit, but you may want to find out when your party has to end, because if you want to go past 10 or 11, a lot of venues don't allow that. So make sure you understand when you have to be out of there by, so that you can plan accordingly. Lastly, I would definitely ask what amenities are included. Is there a bridal suite? suite? Is there any furniture? Really, is there anything else that comes with the venue that's going to be of value to you when you rent the space? I love it when venues give as many amenities as possible, because then you just don't have to think about certain things, but you all want to make sure those amenities, like for instance, the furniture is the type of style that you want. Otherwise, it's kind of moot. So you want to get as much information as possible. Some red flags that you should be aware of. For me, a venue manager that's not great can kind of make or break the process. If they're not responsive from the beginning, or if they ask you to call them instead of being able to send you emails, I feel like that's a little bit of a red flag, because that kind of shows me that they might not have the bandwidth to support all their clients. That's definitely something that I would look out for. How is their communication from the beginning? Do you feel like they're going to try and undercut you? Sometimes I feel that way when I talk to people. So I think that's just something that you want to look out for, is their general vibe. If they don't have a pre-written event deck or a brochure to share with you with all their pricing and laid out, I feel like that's a little bit of a red flag. Or if they don't really have experience doing weddings, or they're just not up to par to what kind of experience that you want. Sometimes it's the spaces that are a little bit less expensive, more affordable, that are going to have this approach. But if budget is really a concern and you're willing to sort of deal with the ups and downs from the venue, then that's okay, especially if it's a venue that you really, really love. That's just something from my experience as a planner that I've come to notice and observe, and it's not my preference to work with these venues that don't have a great venue manager. So that's something that I would definitely look out for when you're reaching out to your venues. Thank you so much for watching this video. I hope that was helpful as you start your venue search. Next week, I'm going to be talking a little bit about budgeting and just how venues fall into the scheme of budgeting. I'm excited to tackle that because money, of course, is always a big topic of conversation in general. So I'm excited to bring you more information about that. I hope to see you next time. If you liked what you saw, please hit that like button and please subscribe for more content. Thank you again for being here.